So one major line of discourse involves the criticism of latent power relations embedded in the production of technological systems. And this acts as something of a counterweight to the hype served up by techno-utopianist discourse. While this criticism is definitely important, my interest is a bit more classical. For me, it was a conscious choice to not study smartphones or internet or any particular technology. The reason for this is firstly obsolescence. I do not know if 5 years from now we are still going to be carrying around these hefty, like, half a kilo smartphones in our pockets. Maybe the technology is going to be different. The other reason, which is more disciplinary, is that there is a tendency to have implicit assumptions when one sees one's object of research as already constituted out there in the world. So we do not know what biases we carry with ourselves into the process of research. So the screen and interface for me are abstractions. Now, let me give you an example of that. So you go drink tea anywhere today, you'll see like a small board with like checkered black and white squares. It's the QR code. So the QR code renders the tea shop screenified. URLs do the same thing to stores, and Zoom does it to meetings. So this is a way in which we can think of screens as abstractions. And this way we can apply it to anything ranging from Snow White's magic mirror on the wall to like the television and even the screens to come, be it holographic screens or virtual reality and augmented reality. So it is in this sense that I mean the screen as an abstraction. All right. I'm interested in practices of sociality at the edge of technological interfaces. Now, I hope to clarify what I mean by this through the rest of this talk. My aim here in this talk is to share with you certain theoretical framings, which I hope will be of some interest to you. All right. Now, the structure of the talk is as follows. Firstly, I'll outline a challenge, a challenge that I perceive developers and designers will have to take into account when they are developing technology for society. And I will close with what I see to be a second challenge. And packaged in between are three major theoretical observations that I can share with you from my research. I'll try to do this quickly, but let's see how this goes. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So that's, sorry, I've given you the outline already. So let's move on to the next slide. And all right, great. All right. So coming to the first challenge. The first challenge I call the problem of spatialization and intensity. Now, this goes back to an old argument in anthropology, which is now forgotten among anthropologists, but I feel is very relevant today. What do I mean by spatialization? Well, the way we use English and most Indo-European languages is that without realizing, we spatialize non-spatial things. What do I mean by that? So if I look around me, there are objects arranged in space. And this is the kind of space we refer to as Euclidean or Newtonian, if you want. These objects arranged in space. But at the same time, we are able to imagine non-spatial things also spatially. Let's think about time. This lecture is for an hour. So now an hour can be conceived of in a spatialized way by thinking of it as minutes arranged next to each other like little matchsticks. So you put 60 minutes next to each other and you get an hour. But the experience of time can be a variety of things. It can be boring, it can be excruciating, it can be sleep inducing, it can be thrilling or exhilarating. These are ways in which time is experienced as duration. Now, the counting of time renders time spatialized. And in this, it has to sacrifice some of the aspects of intensity. So spatialization is usually achieved by creating an imaginary space. It's by drawing a line of time that I'm able to call it time. Okay, now all of this is vague and whatever. Let's see if we can get to more concrete ways of talking about this. Right. One way in which we can think about the difference between spatialization and intensity is to think about pain. Now, what you see on your screen is an image which is an adaptation of what is popularly known as the Likert scale. Now, pain, as we know, is an intensity. It is something that is experienced as excruciating or throbbing or pulsating. In fact, words are very hard. Like, words don't really serve the purpose when it comes to articulating pain or the intensity of pain. But hospitals often do this today. They get you to, like, either in the form of the McGill pain scale or various other, like, graphic renderings like this, that lets you talk about pain in a kind of spatialized way in which pain is counted. This allows you to imagine pain as a kind of spatial entity that goes up and down like in a little bar. Now, this kind of spatialization also performs an objectification of affect. So what does all this have to do with screens and interfaces? Well, we are constantly asked to share intensities in the form of spatializations. For instance, if I log into Facebook, it asks me what's on your mind. Now, a YouTube video is experienced differently by different people. But what you feel about the video is objectified as an upvote or a downvote that can be counted. Now, of course, comments are a space for affective expression. It is limited, but still it is there. So advanced algorithms of natural language processing seek to further objectify the space of comments so that they can pull out certain quantifiable knowledge from what is essentially affects and intensities. So much of product design and user interface design deals with this challenge. How do you render sociality, which deploys itself in a space of intensity within a space that is spatialized and objectified? So this is the first challenge. Now let's get to the next slide and I'll outline my first theoretical point. All right. First theoretical question I'm interested in is the relationship of the subject or the person to screens and interfaces. Right. So let's take a look at this image. You guys try to tell me what's going on here. Just take a look at the image. What are these kids doing? What do you think they're doing? It's not like I have an answer I'm looking for. Now I feel like a lecturer who has asked a question and is waiting for an answer. No, this is like a survey question. Sorry, someone was saying something.
A selfie by mimicking the adults, most likely.
There are some responses. Thank you. Thank you. I think it was Manju who spoke. Thank you. Yeah. Imitating a selfie pose. Absolutely. Now, this image got what we call viral. Lots of Bollywood actors were sharing it. And some people said, wow, we should learn from these kids how to be happy in life. Some other people saw the same image and they said, look, it's so sad. We live in a globalized world where inequality is rampant. We have our fancy smartphones, but look at these kids, they have to pretend with a chappal. It's not so nice, no? Yeah, so these are very polar views. But like you guys said, what is immediately striking is that it's a selfie. But how do we know it's a selfie? That's the more interesting question. There is no smartphone there. There is no image being photographed. And yet we know it's a selfie. We know it's a selfie because apart from the camera, everything else is there. The selfie is a certain way in which we align our bodies to participate in a social picture of desire. This doesn't just pertain to what is called a group selfie, it also pertains to selfies of ourselves. Like often when we click a selfie, we are not satisfied with one. We try to click another or another. We try to find something where our desire kind of like asks questions. Is this it? Is this it? Is this it? And even after clicking it, we are like stains attached to this social picture as it circulates across a number of screens. And we wait for responses. And even people who are looking at these images are going to look at the selfie and they're going to wonder, if it's a group selfie, am I in it? Am I part of the social picture of desire? Right. And well, this logic of stains in the picture is not just something that pertains to images. We can also think of it in relation to other textual forms also. Like in WhatsApp, for instance, you know the blue tick, right? Our subjectivity is attached to that tick mark. And once that blue tick mark comes on, our desire is kind of suspended. It waits for socialization. It asks, have you not seen my message yet? It doesn't ask them directly, but it runs in our head. Another area, a very different area in which we can see this kind of participation or a block from participation in the social picture is in the website called Rap Genius. I don't know how many of you guys have seen this website. So this is a website that allows you to annotate lyrics from rap songs. Now, hip hop, as we know, is a kind of like very organic music form, which has a lot of local references. So let's say you're not from the streets of Compton. Most of the references are going to be lost on you. Now, annotations tell you what the references are. And by reading these annotations, at first, the song is just a bunch of words, but by reading the annotations, you find yourself folded into the social picture. So you're not thrown off as such, but you kind of like come closer into it. All right. So this is the first aspect of the subject's relationship to the screen. Now let's move on to the second aspect, which is the subject's relation to the interface. So let's move on to the second aspect of the subject's relationship, this time to the interface. All right, now let's look at interactions at the edge of the interface. And for this, we take a worm's eye view. And from this worm's eye view, what we see is a series of swipes, clicks, scrolls, a whole series of repetitions. Now, there's a psychoanalytic idea that suggests that repetition is a way for a subject to tentatively make a kind of home space, an imaginary boundary that is constituted through like almost ritualized acts of repetitions. Now, this may appear like a stretch, but imagine yourself waiting for somebody, or traveling on a metro or in a bus, or sitting bored in a meeting or in a classroom. In all of these situations, we find ourselves unmoved from our immediate surroundings. These are usually the times when the phone is out and we kind of scrolling like that. So practices like scrolling and swiping allow us to territorialize at the interface, even as we find ourselves disconnected from our immediate surrounding. Another way to kind of like make the same point is to look at when a major user interface change happens. Now, if you have lived long enough, you would know the various changes that have happened to the Gmail interface, how it began, how it transformed, and how it is now. Now, almost with every transformation to the interface, I felt annoyed because some of the things that I was familiar with, I didn't know where they were. I didn't feel quite at home. Certain familiar repetitions weren't quite finding purchase. Another way in which you can think about like the relationship between territory and interface is when you're invited to a friend's house, for instance. So when we go to a friend's house, we ask after a while, and if you're going to spend enough time there, we're going to ask them for the Wi-Fi password. Now, asking somebody for the Wi-Fi password is a little bit like asking, where's your washroom? Now, where's your washroom is a way of saying, okay, can I be myself at this place? So asking for the Wi-Fi password also is that. It's you becoming more at home at somebody else's house. So I would think of the relationship between the subject and the interface as one of territorialization. where you kind of like make a space within which you're going to dwell. Whether temporarily or permanently, it doesn't matter. It's like at the moment thing. If we notice animals, they do it all the time. Like various kind of repetitive acts that allow like scratching or urinating or various other ways. I would think of this in a kind of analogous manner. All right. So maybe I'm rushing a little bit, so I don't know, but let's move to the next point and then we can see. Like, this is one of the things I struggle with in Zoom, like the lack of kind of sensory feedback. So that usually helps to, that acts like a homeostat to adjust pace and whatever. Right. So the second point. The second point pertains to practices at the edge of interfaces and the habitats within which they are deployed. Okay, what happens to practices when the field of practice is constantly transforming? So this is another major question. This is associated with what I began with earlier when I talked about technological obsolescence. Right, and it also ties in with the discussion on the Gmail interface. So in my view, habits can either fit like in a jigsaw puzzle, or they may not find a good fit. Now, there are two technical ways in anthropology to talk about this. One of them is called hysteresis. And if you remember high school science, you'll know that hysteresis is kind of like the remnants of a magnetic field in a kind of like metallic substance, which has been subject to an electric field, even after the field is turned off. So like that, it's like a certain tendency animates our body, but it no longer finds a purchase in the world. With an example, this becomes a little clearer. Now, I have a number of friends who have young babies, and they tell me these babies play with smartphones all day. And then I've heard it from more than one person who said their child sits next to a large flat screen TV and tries swiping across the TV. So the child is accustomed to the interface of the smartphone and expects the habit of swiping to find a purchase on this large screen TV also, but it doesn't quite translate there. And you can see it in other situations also. For example, when you sit with a hard copy of a photo album, there is a tendency where our fingers try to zoom into the picture as if it were a touch screen. Now, these are kind of like soft ways in which there is a hysteresis, or there is a disconnect between already embodied practices and the environment within which practices can unfold. Now, on the other hand, there are certain practices which are able to translate well. One of these is what used to be called flame wars. Flame wars, as you know, is a kind of angry interchange on messenger boards. And we see a lot of that happening in Twitter. And of course, it happens on WhatsApp, where you find someone furiously like typing at the phone. It's almost like every character that is typed into the phone is a punch in a conversation. But then you'd be surprised to hear that this kind of flaming is a practice that is more than 200 years old. It's a practice that was extant among not to like about 150 years old. It's a practice that was extant among telegraphers. Now, there's an old story that goes that there were two telegraphers who were arguing all day on their respective telegraph lines. And one of them was slightly slightly senior, and he was more worldly wise. So what this guy did was he connected the pendulum of his clock to the telegraph key so that it would send messages as and when the pendulum moved this way and that. And he left for home. Next morning when he returns, he disconnects the pendulum and he hears from the other end of the line, "Admitted defeat at last, have you?" So that other guy was still going at it all night. So the point is that, and we can understand flaming and anger and stuff like that, and the gestures or habits in relation to like, the wagging finger when someone is speaking angrily, or these kind of gesticulations. Now, the expression of anger has certain practices which seem to translate across different kinds of habitats. So this is what I call a situation of conjuncture, where despite the habitat changing, practices are able to find purchase. So this is another thing that can be useful to keep in mind while designing products. When someone is proposing a new kind of, when someone is proposing a new product, does it involve practices on the user side which are locked in hysteresis, which do not find purchase in this new environment, or is there conjuncture? I'm sure you guys think of all of this stuff. This is just a way to frame it theoretically. So this may not be all that new to you. And this, of course, doesn't pertain to just interfaces. Like when you see people from village or something that villages who come to a metro station, they'll be lost amongst all the signs. They will not be able to find their way. And the inverse applies equally. So when a villager comes to a metro station, they are unmoored from the place. They do not know how to read the signs, how to navigate the place. And this applies conversely also. Like when we go to a village, we won't know like how to negotiate the gullies and how to, sit properly in a share auto without falling off. Various things like this. It takes a while for the appropriate adjustment to happen. So these are various ways in which we can think about hysteresis and conjuncture in relation to habitats. So now the third point I want to discuss is contemporary data science and new models of artificial intelligence, be it machine learning or deep learning. All of these have a lot to do with data. Now, firstly, data is not new. Data is an old category, but there is a distinction between what we can call old data and new data. Now, old data is the kind of data we would associate with something like the census. This is a way in which you go with explicit questions and explicit tables, and you collect the data. And based on that data, a certain kind of knowledge is going to be produced and acted upon. It measures certain things, and it allows you to act based on the knowledge that you have measured. Now, the distinction between new and old data is that new data is not something that is explicitly elicited. What we call new data captures digital footprints. What are digital footprints? These are the records that are left behind on the other side of the screen. Every time we swipe or touch or open or interact in any form at the edge of the interface. What characterizes new data is that data is produced in an automatic way. Of course, this used to happen like most computer, there's this concept of the log in computers, and most developers will know that every time something breaks down, you have to go look at the log, see what happened. It allows you to trace things. Right. So it is my view that systems that are built upon this new paradigm of data, be it recommender systems like you find in Netflix, be it the various curation algorithms such as Facebook's news feed or Google's page rank, all of them are predicated upon an extraction of the surplus value of sociality. What do I mean by the surplus value of sociality? Sociality, by sociality, I mean any kind of interaction. It is my view that there is a surplus to any social interaction. For instance, if I'm walking down the road and I meet my friend and I say hi to the friend, it's something that stays between us. It's something that is in our memory. It lasts beyond that moment. Now, if I ping a friend on WhatsApp and say hi, it's going to be recorded in a database. This is a way in which a particular social interaction exceeds itself, and this excess is recorded. All social interactions exceed themselves. And the kind of one way in which to think about it is that if you say something today, it can come back to bite you later on in an argument with somebody close to you. That the return of what you said today is the excess of this moment's interaction. Now, what the spatialization or the objectified recording of data allows is that this kind of surplus value of sociality is now extracted. Your likes and your desires may be private to you, or they may be known to certain people who know you well. But now, based on your interactions on a variety of interfaces, the surplus value of your social life is extracted as data and it's recorded in a variety of databases. Now, these are used to produce various reconfigurations to your interactional environment. Crowdsourced data is just a kind of like DIY survey. It's like saying you self-report. You self-report the status of active ATMs. Some people say it works well. Some people say it's really stale data. But then there was one solution which was new. And this came from a money managing app called Walnut. Maybe some of you guys used it then also. So Walnut is a money manager, which means it has access to your SMS. Now, by reading SMS, Walnut categorizes your various expenses. So when demonetization happened, the team at Walnut wanted to do something, and they thought they can make an ATM locator, which is far more accurate than crowdsourced apps, by populating a map interface by drawing on the SMS in your inbox. Now, an SMS arrives instantly as soon as you withdraw an ATM, as soon as you withdraw from an ATM. Now, your little social interaction between you and the ATM machine generates a generates a surplus, which sits like a redundancy in your inbox. Often we don't look at it or we just delete it. Walnut finds use for it. By extracting this surplus, they are able to populate the map on time with accurate data. Because the SMS says the time of withdrawal, the location of the ATM, and the amount of cash withdrawn. So they're able to give a much more comprehensive picture of active ATMs at that point in time. This is the power of the extraction of the surplus value of sociality. Now, what this allows companies to do, there's a question. When you say surplus here, are you specifically referring to information surplus? No, what I mean by surplus is in the sense of an excess or a redundancy. Like think of all the bills that you get from a supermarket. It's an excess to the transaction. We know how much we spent, and usually the bill is crumpled and thrown away somewhere. Gone are the days when you file it in kind of like a folder or something like that. But your money manager is able to extract data from this bill. It's able to say you spent this much money on groceries. So surplus is an excess from which use can be generated at a later point in time. Yeah, information surplus is one way to think about it, but you can think of it in general as a kind of excess or redundancy. All right. So now what this allows designers to do is that this kind of data helps reconfigure the investments people have to interfaces. Now, what do I mean by that? When we are going to check something out, or when we are going to sign up for, in all of these kind of form processes, the form filling processes, there's a certain amount of irritation. We want to click some things, we want to get done with certain things fast, and we don't want to go through the pain of clicking through certain things. And there is this famous case where like this is the distinction between a default opt-in or a kind of manual opt-in to charity programs. So when a checkbox at checkout is automatically checked, which allows you to give 2 rupees or something like that to charity, research has found that people are more willing to go ahead with that. Meaning to say they are less prone to uncheck the checkbox, as opposed to when you have to manually click on the checkbox to give to charity. Now, this is a certain small piece of knowledge that is generated through the analysis of data. You do A/B tests and whatnot, right? Now, all these A/B tests and these kind of data models allow you to shape how the user's investment, unconscious investment, unconscious investment finds purchase on the app. Very often when we are using most interfaces, we are not conscious. Like we are not consciously doing it. It's more automatic. Our hand does it. It's guided by certain kind of unconscious investments. So this kind of data based knowledge lets you configure this kind of unconscious environment in which users operate. And there's a term for this also, which is derived from behavioral economics, and it's called nudges. Right. Earlier, I said that data is the way in which contemporary machine learning systems are engineered today. Earlier, artificial intelligence was based more on explicitly specified rules. This was the age of symbolic AI and expert systems. But today's AI relies on human generated data and learns from it, as it were. Basically, this means drawing correlations and figuring out like the functional form from kind of raw data. Yeah. So in this situation, what's happening? We just discussed that data that is collected at the edge of interfaces bears something that is unconscious in humans. We ourselves are not conscious of some stuff. Like, for example, when Ola improved its location accuracy, and I met a friend in Delhi, this friend was struggling to speak in Hindi. I was surprised and I asked him, last time he was speaking good Hindi, what happened? Person says, because Ola improved location accuracy, I don't have to talk to the driver. The driver was the only person I was speaking in Hindi with. So that's why it slipped my mind right now. So this is this is a kind of radical way in which things play out unconsciously, just by a small design change in the interface. Given that something of the unconscious is embedded in data, and given that this data forms the kind of raw material on which artificial intelligence systems are built, maybe we can think of AI also as having something like a machinic unconscious. You guys might be familiar with a lot of work in recent AI, which shows that some of these algorithms are biased. That there are algorithms which are racist or whatever. One way to think about it is that, like, the data is flawed. We can improve, like, the design of the system. It's the fault of the designers and something like that. But another way to think about it is that the AI has absorbed a kind of collective unconscious that is drawn from human beings who help to generate the data that are built into these systems. So in that sense, the problem is much more complex than we think today. There's another way in which we can think about the machinic unconscious. And this is from a class of algorithms which are called GANs, or generative adversarial networks. Now, what these do is that they're able to tweak the input to standard convolutional neural networks and get it to misclassify an image which it was classifying correctly just a little while earlier. For example, to an image classifier, if you give a picture of a cat, it will say it's a cat with 99 point whatever probability. It's a banana with 0.005 probability. Now, a GAN will introduce certain elements of noise into this. And now this image, which practically to human eyes looks exactly identical to earlier, will make the convolutional neural network to now classify it as a, say, football with a very high probability, although it's apparent to a human looking at it that it's a cat. And just 2 minutes ago, the neural network was performing well. It was classifying it correctly. Now it's as if these generative adversarial neural networks are able to nudge the other kind of AI into misclassifying it. It's as if GANs play around with the unconscious of machine learning models. This is just a provocation for you guys to, I don't know whether you buy it or not. All right, let's go to the next slide, which is the last slide for this talk. All right, I'll close with a discussion on the second challenge which I see for designers and developers. Now I call this the challenge of the automaton and the mediator. One way to think about this is the dichotomy between asking for directions as opposed to looking at Google Maps. Throughout modernity, what characterizes transformation is the fact that a certain kind of mediator appears on the scene as a human. Now let's think about the Turing machine. The Turing machine is the first conceptual computer. In Turing's analysis of the Turing machine, he doesn't first construct the machine in the abstract. He begins with a human being. He says a person sitting at a desk with a pen, paper, and a pencil is a Turing machine, so long as this person is subject to a strict regime of discipline. So a person marking on small squares of papers with a specific set of symbols, following a certain set of logical steps, is in fact a computer. This is Turing's point. So in one way, highly disciplined processes undertaken by humans are the conditions of possibility for the emergence of automated replacements. But then we also find that not everything is getting automated. Like I said, people still continue to ask for directions in India. One way to think about it is, yeah, Google Maps may not be all that accurate. But there is also this kind of reluctance. There is also this kind of insistence of the human mediator. So there are two kinds of mediators that I see in this kind of social picture. One class of mediator we can think of as the vanishing mediator. Now, the vanishing mediator functions as something as a catalyst for the emergence of automated processing. But then you have something like the insistent mediator. And the insistent mediator is a resistance to automation. A good example for this is customer care. Now, some companies have very elaborately designed automated customer care interfaces. Still, so many customers are happy only when they talk to a customer care executive, even though the executive is doing the same thing as this person is doing. And often it's not just a question of the ability to navigate these interfaces. It's really a question of who do you want to socialize with. And because you guys work in healthcare a lot, this will come up a lot, in the sense that what are the situations in which a human can vanish from the picture, leaving behind an automated system as a replacement? I would think it's not such an easy question to answer. All right, so this is all I had for you guys. I'll stop here, and maybe we can go into other stuff in the Q&A if there are things.
Amazing. Thanks, Deepak, so much. And thanks for your patience as well, navigating through the various technical challenges. I'll open it up to folks in case anyone has any questions or comments that they want to ask.
Hi. No, so just one broad question that I had was, you talk about this, the mediator versus the automaton, and how AML will take over. But I didn't understand how that's sort of related to the idea that we started with, which is our sort of relationship with screens in general. So maybe I missed that part. So can you just explain that part? Like, why is this a challenge per se to like our relationship with screens? Because a lot of automations are sort of like under the hood. They don't necessarily happen through a screen per se. Or I mean, Uber is an example where I think, and Google Maps, where instead of asking someone, you look at a screen. But there are other ways of automating that have happened, right?
Thank you, Sriram, for the question. Okay, maybe I rushed through that part a little. So no, it's not my view that AML is going to replace the human. And of course, much of automation, as you say, happens in a realm far away from human interaction. That being said, what I want to focus on is the processes that happen at the edge of interfaces. Think of customer care. Now, customer care is where a customer wants to have a certain problem resolved by the company. Now, the point of interface between the two of them can be a chat bot. It can be a kind of clickable menu. Both of these situations are where the interaction is with an automated agent. Of course, there is also customer care with the customer care executive. Now, what's the difference between the two? Why is it that certain people, despite there being a pretty good system, a good automated system, still want to interact with the customer care agent? Now, there is no properly technical reason for this. This is a problem of sociality. It's whether you want to interact with an automated agent or whether you want to interact with this kind of mediator who insists in the social picture. Although the function has been superseded by a better, like most AIML says what? That it has better than human level of performance, right? Still, there is the insistence of the human in certain situations. And these are going to be determined in a kind of contingent way. And you will notice, like you will see this happening when there are, say, for example, accidents. Like there was an Uber crash, I think somewhere in where, Nevada or I don't quite remember where. But when the crash happened, there was a lawsuit, and the lawsuit found the supervising driver to be at fault. Although there was kind of a delay in the algorithm alerting the person also to take control or whatever, still the court found the person to be at fault, not the autonomous algorithm. In another situation, I don't know if you know Jerry Sussman. Jerry Sussman is an early figure in computer science, one of the old hackers at MIT. He delivers a talk, and in this talk, there's this question like, do you think robots are a threat to us? He says, I don't think so, but then we need certain safeguards. Some of the things he says is the system should be interpretable and interrogable. What does that mean? It means like you'll be able to put it in a kind of situation like a congressional hearing, and you'll be able to ask the automated agent questions to which it can respond. But then he adds something else. He says, at the end of the day, there should be a kind of fail-safe switch where a human can intervene and turn it off. Now, I'm not saying he's right or he's wrong, but this is someone who has seen the field for a long time. And in his imagination also, it's not a settled question about whether something can be automated away or whether the insistence of a mediator is important. Now, what relevance does this have for you? Like I said, because you guys are in healthcare, I think there would be a distinction between a patient or a patient's caregiver interacting with an automated app which gives them information and where they get to interact with a person. I don't know if care translates well in automation. That's the point I wanted to make.
Got it.
That from the point of view of the designer, it may be like a very good automated solution, but very often you might find it irrational that people don't adopt. But that's because it plays on this logic. Because certain people still don't want to use Google Maps and ask for directions. It's kind of like it's a sociological problem, not a technological.
Got it. Just one small follow-up to that, and I'll stop. Is that, like you said, it's a sociological problem. So do you think that this is like a inherent mentality that some people have where they have a certain preference? Or, I mean, my question is like, in the long run, can eventually everyone be converted to sort of like not necessarily having a human mediator? Sort of, because like you said, care is it's a very human concept, and sort of like automating that is definitely like a huge challenge. But I'm just wondering, is it like an inherent phenomenon, or is it just inertia to change? Is it a different kind of, I mean, people went from horses to like cars. It took time, but eventually everyone moved. So is this one of those kind of situations where it's just about time where everyone will eventually shift? So just curious about that.
Okay, thank you again for the question. How I understand your question is, what is the logic of transformation? If there is a resistance to transformation, how does transformation happen?
And is the resistance sort of an inherent property of like the humans, or is it a matter of familiarity where people are just not familiar with something new, and therefore they are just inherently not taking to it?
I would say that it's always contingent, that it's not generalizable, but rather it's contingent. That being said, then what triggers transformation? I didn't have enough time to go into this in detail, but what triggers transformation is what I call the logic of the vanishing mediator. Now, the vanishing mediator is a little bit like training wheels. It's a little bit like the disciplined human computer in Turing's paper. Now, if you look at, say, McDonald's or something like that, the way they interact with you is completely kind of mechanical and robotic. Now, it's easy to automate that. So, if you're able to produce a certain kind of catalyzing mediator who's able to slip away and introduce automation, that's a way in which translation can happen. But like I said, this is always contingent. It's not possible to say a priori what will work and what will not work. Because ultimately it's the social that determines certain things. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, it did. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thanks, Sriram. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks everyone for attending and joining as well.
Thanks.